After decades of preaching hope, inspiring millions, and building a name that stood as a pillar of faith, Pastor Tony Evans and his family were suddenly surrounded by news that shook the Christian world to its core. People had always seen him as a man of unshakable strength, someone who seemed untouchable. But then came the moment that no one wanted to believe. His wife, who had always been a quiet and steady support behind the scenes, finally confirmed what many feared, and you won't believe how this single confirmation turned whispers into a storm that spread across churches everywhere. Let me tell you, this was not just a family issue anymore. This was something that brought the private life of one of the most respected pastors into the public eye. Tony Evans had lived 75 years filled with service, discipline, and leadership. From the outside, his life looked perfect. His ministry had touched millions across more than 130 countries. His books sat in Christian homes around the world, and his sermons had been carried daily through thousands of radio stations. He was not just a preacher, he was a spiritual giant. But here is the shocking part. Behind all the strength and all the success, the Evans family was carrying a weight far heavier than people ever imagined. This was not something that could stay hidden forever. This was where it got interesting, because while people only saw the sermons, the books, and the faith conferences, nobody saw the silent battle happening in the background of his life. For years, the Evans family looked like an example of unity and strength. His children, like Priscilla Shirer, had become leaders themselves, carrying on their father's legacy of faith. Together, they looked untouchable, almost like royalty in the Christian community. But destiny took an unexpected turn. What was once only speculation became reality when his wife spoke openly and admitted what they had kept private for so long. And the craziest part was, the more she revealed, the more it became clear that even the strongest leaders faced storms that no one could escape. What makes this story different? It was not a scandal or a controversy created by gossip. It was the raw truth of human weakness standing in the middle of spiritual greatness. The moment his wife confirmed the truth, it felt like the whole Christian world paused. The reality was heavy, emotional, and deeply personal. It showed that Tony Evans, a man who had preached faith and courage for decades, was now walking through his own valley. One detested every word he had ever spoken from the pulpit. This was no longer about sermons. It was about survival, about how faith held up when life turned against you. The story began to unfold in ways no one expected, and it was clear this was just the beginning of something much bigger. As the truth started to spread, people realized that what had been hidden for years was now out in the open. The church community, his followers, and even those who only knew Pastor Evans through his books or radio sermons felt a deep shock. This was not only about one man, this was about the reality that even giants could fall weak. Let me tell you, the news carried weight because Tony Evans was not an ordinary pastor. He had built Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship from only 10 members in a small house into a congregation of over 10,000. He had written books that guided generations, and his ministry, The Urban Alternative, had reached people worldwide. Yet, despite all of this, his wife's words reminded everyone that no amount of success could shield a person from the storms of life. People kept asking, why now? Why did the Evans family decide to share this at this moment? And here's the shocking part. His wife admitted that keeping it private was no longer possible. The struggles they were facing as a family were too heavy to carry in silence. What makes this story different is how openly they chose to share it, instead of protecting an image of perfection. This is where it gets interesting, because most church leaders hide their weaknesses, but Pastor Evans and his family broke that wall of silence. They allowed the world to see them not as untouchable icons, but as human beings in need of prayer and support. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. You won't believe how quickly social media filled with prayers, messages, and testimonies. People began writing about how Pastor Evans had changed their lives. marriages restored through his books, broken faith renewed through his sermons, and countless stories of hope connected to his voice. The craziest part was that in his moment of weakness, his influence became even stronger. Instead of losing respect, people admired him more because he was willing to show his humanity. But here's the part that touched the most hearts. His wife described nights filled with uncertainty when even their faith felt tested. She shared how hard it was to watch the man who had always been a source of strength to so many, now struggling to find his own. Yet, she also said this trial had brought their family closer than ever. Prayers became more real, family moments became more precious, and gratitude for each day became a new kind of blessing. Destiny had taken an unexpected turn, but instead of destroying them, it was shaping them into an even stronger example of faith under fire. When the rumors first started about Pastor Evans facing health challenges, many people dismissed them as nothing more than speculation. After all, he had always been seen as a man of great strength, someone who preached about resilience, endurance, and faith in God. But then came the moment that silenced every rumor, his wife's public confirmation. Let me tell you, it was not just a passing statement. It was heartfelt, raw, and deeply emotional. She admitted openly that Pastor Evans had been walking through one of the hardest seasons of his life. And here is the shocking part. It was not about scandal, not about controversy stirred by gossip, but about the very real battle of health and human weakness. She revealed how this season had changed their family in ways they never expected. There were nights filled with tears, moments of fear, and days when the future felt uncertain. Imagine the weight of watching someone who had always been strong, always ready to encourage others, now struggling with his own limitations. This is where it gets interesting because instead of hiding, the Evans family chose to let the world in. What makes this story different is that their openness reminded everyone that even leaders need prayers, even pastors need support, and even giants of faith can feel weak. You won't believe how people responded. Thousands began sharing how Pastor Evans had personally impacted their lives. Families said his sermons restored broken homes. Individuals battling depression said his words lifted them when nothing else worked. And many claimed his books had given them courage in dark times. The craziest part was that his weakness became a fresh source of strength for others. His struggle, instead of breaking his image, made him more relatable and more powerful in the eyes of the world. But his wife's words carried something even deeper. She admitted that there were moments when her own faith shook, moments when she wondered if they would get through it. Yet, she said those were the very moments when they learned the true meaning of trust. Destiny took an unexpected turn, but in that turn, they discovered the power of unity, prayer, and endurance. Their story was no longer just about leading a church. It became a living testimony that touched every believer who had ever faced their own storm. When Pastor Tony Evans finally spoke out himself, the whole atmosphere shifted. For years, people had looked to him as the voice of strength, a man who always had the right words for every situation. But this time was different. Standing in front of his congregation, he admitted something no one expected to hear. I am not invincible. Let me tell you, those words carried more weight than any polished sermon he had ever preached. For decades, he had been seen as untouchable, but here is the shocking part. He broke the image and revealed the man behind the pulpit. He went on to describe how the diagnosis and treatments had forced him to face fear in ways he never had before. He said there were nights when he lay awake, asking God questions, feeling uncertain, and even shedding tears. This is where it gets interesting, because instead of hiding those struggles, he chose to share them openly. What makes this story different is that Tony Evans showed that faith is not about being perfect or free from pain. It is about holding on to God even when the nights feel the darkest. You won't believe how people reacted. Clips of his message spread across social media within hours. not because he gave a perfectly polished sermon, but because his honesty touched people at their core. The craziest part was his words gave hope to those battling illnesses, depression, and silent struggles of their own. People saw a man who had preached about faith for years, now living it in the rawest way possible. He reminded everyone that suffering was not a sign of weakness, but often the place where God's presence became the most real. Destiny took an unexpected turn for Pastor Evans, but instead of retreating, he turned it into a testimony. His voice, even in weakness, became louder than ever. He reminded the church that leaders are human too, that they need prayers and compassion just like everyone else. And as his family continued to walk through this journey, their story became bigger than themselves. It became a call for unity, for honesty, and for a deeper understanding of faith. In the end, the Evans family showed the world that true strength was never about standing tall without struggles, but about trusting God to carry you through them.